Hello, and welcome to this video where we will be continuing our journey in this domain of CISSP, which is domain 2 of asset security. And we will look forward from our last lecture where we have encountered the data security frameworks, which defines the way how the data posture and a framework to be built around your data specific controls. And today we're gonna look specifically into the data security controls coming out of those frameworks. Now, in in a very high level uh, differentiation, you can define security controls into three broad categories. One is technical controls, the second one is administrative control, and the third one is physical control. Looking at the definitions of all these three controls, you may wonder why we would have something related to physical control for data which is intangible in nature. You cannot touch the data, you cannot feel the data. So this is uh, uh, this is a question which holds a very complex thought process behind it to be answered. But nevertheless, let's look at the three control domains that is related to data security. Technical controls are the one which are dominantly to shape the behavior of the hardware or the software, the compute capabilities that is processing the data. So for example, do you have leaky software? And by leaky, what it means that it is outputting values which it's not supposed to. Consider, for example, an API which only supposed, for example, to provide output as couple of attributes, but what if the output comes out to be more than couple of attributes, which is kind of not intended for the functioning of the API. So the leaky software, hardware also can have that problem, and you can also recall from the past how do you say the attacks that have happened on the hardware where the logic of the hardware configuration has been misused to unearth or pull the data out. So you must look at those kind of attacks like the Windows Blue attack, the blue screen attack kind of thing, and there are a few others in the archive that you can look. Administrative control are the one which shapes the behavior of the humans. So, for instance, you walk into an office, you encounter a security guard is standing outside, which may ask for your identification. If you are, for instance, new to an organization and you still do not hold an identification of the organization or of the identification provided by the organization, then the guard may just see the identification which is generally provided by government, for example, a government provided passport or a driving license or an identification card, and he or she may let you in, where you may, for example, encounter a receptionist, where the person working at the reception may provide you with a temporary access. But all these controls are meant to make sure that when once you entered into an office, for example, that you do not have unfettered asset or unlimited asset to go anywhere and everywhere. Your movement in that office will be controlled by the actors, security guard, or the receptionist, who then acting on behalf of the applied administrative control. The third control domain in this is the physical control, and that is to do with shaping the behavior of anything that moves For example, humans, we just encountered the example of security guard asking for your identification and receptionist providing you with a temporary access. But it may also include things like robots, IoT devices, and you may ask yourself a question: how often do you encounter a robot in your normal way of working? But then think of large manufacturing unit like automobiles. Think of a vast uh, inventory and conveyor belt kind of industry where the operation happens manually through the machine. Think of the ports where large container ships docks and the large containers are handled by big robotic arms, which is in general would be very difficult for humans to live. And these physical controls are meant to check that, hey, once we are moving, for example, at a dockyard, once we are moving a container from location X to Y, who has picked up the container, which robotic arms has picked up the container, where the container has to be lifted, where the container needs to be put. So this data is also very important. Each movement of this container, for example, is creating a data point which you need for any purposes you may deem important, for example, for audit logs, for example, inventorizing your register to make sure that the movement of the container is also registered in your inventory system and things like that. So in a nutshell, these three control areas work in tandem with each other to make sure that we have a foolproof data security framework implemented, which will allow us to prevent misuse of the data, leakage of the data, and, for instance, theft of the data. With this, I'll stop here. Thanks for listening, and I'll hope to see you in the next video. Thank you very much.